You know, when you are wrestling with a big decision or something that is causing you trouble and you can't really figure out what the source of the trouble is, you just go around and around and around in your mind. And I have likened this sensation in the past to feeling like you are trapped in a room with no doors or windows and you just cannot figure out how to get out of it, right? You know, you don't want to be there anymore. You just can't figure out the best path forward. And it's just a tough place to be. And it's something that I think we struggle with as solopreneurs because we don't always have an available community that understands where we're coming from, that can sort of relate and give honest, constructive feedback and sort of help us through these times. And so what we do is we turn to social media, which can actually have the opposite effect from, well, it's not that it has the opposite effect. It's just not always the most constructive place to go, right? So if you have an in-person community, congratulations, good. If you don't, I think you should put it on your list of things to prioritize this year is meeting some other people and forming a community that you can rely on like that. But in the meantime, I wanted to have a bit of a conversation that I share with you here on the podcast about a topic that I think a lot of photographers are feeling trapped around, which is the new feeling of the photography industry, or the sort of the newest phase of photography in the world, and the appetite for photography, the willingness to pay professional rates for photography. These are not new challenges for photographers, but I do feel like over the last couple of years, something has shifted. And I have been kind of going around in my own head about that. You're going to hear all about my feelings about that over the course of this episode. But as I have been sort of seeing and hearing more photographers struggle with this, I have wanted to weigh in and sort of share my thoughts about it. So I had planned a conversation or a podcast episode for the beginning of the year to address that. And then I was talking to Dayna. If you don't know Dayna from the Consistency Club, she works with me and has worked with me for the last couple of years as the marketing director at This Can't Be That Hard. And she's such a wealth of knowledge, and not just knowledge, but also energy and sort of positive, supportive energy, which we can all use. And when I was talking to her about this, she brought up an analogy that I loved. Surprise, surprise. As soon as she brought it up and we got into it, I was like, oh man, never mind. This isn't going to be a solo show. I'm interviewing you for this particular podcast. And it really is less of an interview and more of a conversation. So I want to invite you to kind of pull up a chair and sit at our little coffee shop table where we are discussing the state of the industry, what's needed to succeed these days. And I think you're really going to enjoy it. I know I really enjoyed it. And I hope it kind of kicks your year off on the right note. Welcome to This Can't Be That Hard. My name is Anami Tonkin, and I help photographers run profitable, sustainable businesses that they love. Each week on the podcast, I cover simple, actionable strategies and systems that photographers at every level of experience can use to earn more money in a more sustainable way. Running a photography business doesn't have to be that hard. You can do it, and I can show you how. Dayna, welcome. It's so great to have you here.
Thanks.
I actually really appreciate you being willing to take the time to have this conversation, because I feel like I was going to do a solo show on this, and you're such a good person to talk to about this, because it's like, you know enough about the photography industry, because now you've been working with me for 2.5 solid years. You've been all up in the photography business, but you're also not in it. So I feel like you've got that perspective. Plus you're just an awesome cheerleader in general. Like, you're a very positive person. And I feel like sometimes we all need that, even if I consider myself to be a pretty positive person, but like, we all have our down days. And so it's always good to have that friend who's like, come on.
Yeah,
pick yourself up.
Yeah. And I think it is really important to be able to have a conversation that is both like pick yourself up and let's actually talk truth. So I
Yeah.
think that was really how this started, was like, let's dig into this,
Yeah.
and really figure out what is going on both in the world and in our minds, and then kind of talk about it in a way that is constructive.
I just feel like I have heard from a lot of students recently, and disproportionately, because I've been doing this for 5 years. And I feel like in the last 6 to 9 months, I have gotten a lot more of this sort of thing than I have in the past, which is people who are just like burnt out and feeling overburdened by how difficult running a photography business is right now.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's always some level of that, but I just felt like it was getting to be more and more. And I was talking to you about that, and you raised this idea of video games, which I am like completely blissfully unaware of. And you were talking about these levels. So I'm not even going to I'm not going to show how unknowledgeable I am about this. I'm going to let you take over right there and just share this sort of analogy with everybody.
Yeah. Okay. So I love video games. I've always loved games. Shout out to all my gamers out there. And I realized, man, it's been a while. It's been like 20 years ago. Like, I realized a long time ago that there is an analogy in how video games are set up for how life is set up. So if you aren't a video game person, the old school video games, like think Super Mario Brothers, okay, is set up such that like you are a character, and as you go through the world, you pick up skills and tools, and you learn how to do different new tricks or cast spells or whatever the game, lends itself to. And then sort of at the end of several levels, you meet up with a mini boss, or, a boss at the end of the level. And this is this big monster, and they're really hard to beat. And usually what happens is the first time that you come up against them, you get absolutely smashed. You like die in like 2 seconds. And then you're like, okay, wait, let me go back and get a different hammer or learn a different thing. And you go back and you learn those things, and you come back and you probably still lose to them. Like you go up against this boss a couple of times, and each time you get a little bit better, but you're like, oh wait, I need to go back and I need to learn something else before I'm ready to beat this boss. And so that really became an analogy for me in business, which is like, your business, a long time ago, you did a podcast episode on this, and we'll link it in the show notes, but it was like the different phases of starting a business. Like when you're a startup, and then like, when you're sort of like just, you're not quite a startup, but you're a beginner. Then you're like in your growth phase. Then you're in your
Right.
I can't remember the names.
It was the interview I did with the guy from Six Figure Photography, Brian.
Yes. And yeah. I love that. We had this really cool
not
graphic.
6 Figure Photography, 6 Figure Startup or something. Yeah.
But
we'll get it right in the show notes. Sorry.
We will. And he had these great like names for all the different sort of like levels of your business. And so, every time that you are, and I love that because that is really true. Like when you're a newbie in photography, like, I have seen this now, people who are, in their first 1 or 2 years of business are very different than the people who are in year 7 or 8 of their business. Right. But what I often have seen in a lot of businesses, specifically in self-employed businesses, because it's really just you doing it, is when you are moving from one phase to the next phase, you have to beat this boss. You have to you come up against this sort of ceiling or like mini boss in your business. And if you don't have all the right tools to get over that level and push into the next level, it can really feel how I perceive people to be feeling right now, which is super defeating, super burnout. You're like, again, you're just like crashing into this wall over and over again. So to go back to the video game analogy, that is like the idea of like, if you keep trying that boss fight over and over again without going back and getting new tools and learning new things and up leveling your skills, then yeah, that's the definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting
a different result. Yeah.
So you have to go back and be like, you have to take kind of a step back and be like, okay, what do I need to beat this boss level? And so I think I have looked at this vibe that is happening right now. And I think that it is both just inherent in how you grow in any small business, right? Mm-hmm. Like when you go from being a startup to being established, there is going to be a ceiling that you go through from one level to the next. There's going to be this boss that you have to beat, right? But then also, I think there has been this confluence, is that the right word, of
Mhm.
like the photography industry specifically. Like, what has the photography industry has undergone a pretty massive change in the last 20 years as compared to, a lot of other industries.
Yeah.
So I think part of it is just the basics of like running any small business. And then the other part of it is we're all sort of coming up against a little boss right now because of the photography industry in general.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, yeah, why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I was going to jump in just from my own perspective. So I started my business in 2010, but like I remember the first time I got married, it was 2004, and our wedding photographer wasn't a wedding photographer. He was like a photojournalist that we knew. And we were like, "Hey, do you want to take pictures at our wedding?" And he was like, "Yeah, I have this new digital camera." And I was like, can it like, that sounds terrible. And he was like, "No, no, no, it's pretty good." It was not pretty good, but it was better than like digital cameras to that point had been. And he was really excited about the fact that he wasn't going to have to pay a bunch of money to shoot film, but he didn't have a website. And so I had absolutely no idea. And, like also things like the Knot didn't exist. I mean, I was like, it's funny to look back and think that wasn't really all that long ago.
Yeah.
And yet it was a completely different process from when I got married a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Completely different. And then when I think about him and his photography business, when digital became like a real thing, he quit. He got out of photography because he was one of these guys who had been in business as a film photographer and had like shopped his portfolio around. Like he had prints that he would send to various publications and they would hire him as a photographer. And when the industry shifted, and all of a sudden, not only did he need to like switch over to digital completely, but he also was going to have to build a website and do all this stuff to like run a different business in a newly flooded market. He was like, and I'm out, which, that's fine. That was the right decision for him. That was the first thing in the early 2000s.
Yep.
And then around 2010, I guess that was around when Instagram kind of hit the scene. So around that time, because in the beginning of my business, it was still the thing where you couldn't post anything other than photos that you took with your phone on Instagram, right? You'd like put the Instagram filter on them.
Yep.
And then I remember when all of a sudden you were able to put your professional photos into your phone and add them into Instagram.
Yeah.
And how I was like, woo, this is going to be a great way to market my business. And it was, because at that point, 99% of the content that was on Instagram was very amateurish. And then if you got to be one of the first to market that was showing, something that people couldn't see all the time on their phones, that drove demand, I feel like in retrospect, through the roof.
Through the roof. When
you're in it, you don't see it all that well, but I definitely in retrospect see that like I was very much a beneficiary of that confluence of events that was like increased, number of people who were getting really good at photography.
Yes.
And then the increased exposure to that by everyone.
And on our side, an insane demand. Okay, so actually this is so funny. The other day I got like a Facebook memory of a photo that I took on my phone in 2008 and felt like it was good enough to post to Facebook. You guys, it is like one of those photos that looks like I was moving my phone while I took it. Like it's that blurry, and it's a picture of the castle lit up at Disneyland. It is so terrible. I can't even describe how terrible it is. And I thought it was good enough to post on my Facebook timeline because that was the state of, I probably had a flip phone at that point, and it had like a camera, and that was the state of cameras on your phone. So then cameras on your phone started to get a little better, but they were nowhere near as good as the photographs that you all were making with your professional cameras. And
certainly not at that time.
Certainly not. So then we started being like, wow, I want that. And so this idea of being Instagram worthy sort of came in, like, I would say 2012 to 2016, 18, somewhere in there. This idea of like, if you're going to post a picture of your family or your kid or your newborn or your pet or whatever, it better be beautiful and look professional. And so that drove demand through the roof. But meanwhile,
I
The
also,
oh
oh,
yeah, you
sorry, I was
go.
going to jump in and say, and it really wasn't just Instagram either. It was Pinterest
Yeah,
too, because I
Pinterest.
feel
Yeah,
like people were
Facebook's.
on Pinterest and they were like, I'm going to throw a birthday party that's going to be fit for kings for
Yeah.
my 3-year-old, and it better have photos or it didn't happen. Like
Yep.
that became kind of the mantra, like photos or
Yes.
it didn't happen.
Yes, and again, you couldn't. That's a perfect example of a birthday party for a 3-year-old. You couldn't take photos on your phone
No.
that could show how all the effort that you put into that birthday party. So you hired a photographer, right?
Yeah.
So, I think, and then but at the same time in that era, 2012 to 2018, whatever, the barrier to entry for becoming a photographer was still pretty high. Like it wasn't so, remember guys, like Amazon wasn't as booming as it is right now. You couldn't just like, you know, ordering. I feel like if you ordered a camera online during that time, that would be like absolutely bonkers. Like in the insane idea of ordering something that expensive online.
Right.
Whereas now it's just like, yeah, like mail it to me, right?
Right.
So the barrier to entry was still high. So there definitely was this moment in time where the demand, everybody wanted professional photos of everything, their kid taking their first poop to like their wedding, right? And that we didn't have the ability to take those photos ourselves. And now I think that camera phones, while they are certainly and never, I don't think they ever can be as good as I'm going to call it a real camera. I don't know. Mm-hmm. It never will reach that level. However, you can use your camera phone now to take to take photos of your kid's third birthday party, we'll say, mm-hmm. right? And like you won't have the same level, but you will be able to capture all the beautiful balloon arches you made and the cake that you did. And that you will be able to capture those details in a way that you will then be able to turn around and post that on Instagram or put it in a photo album if you want. Of course, it's not going to be the same as professional photos, but I think that like that part of the demand has certainly come down.
Well, and it's a couple of things. Like, I feel like there's also been a bit of a backlash, not just in the anti-Pinterest, it's like, you know what? I am sick of trying to make my entire life look like a perfect grid. Like it's not reality. So there's been a bit of a backlash on that. And by a bit, I mean, it's been a backlash.
Yeah.
And then I also think that photography styles there's like another piece to the puzzle here, which is that when all of this other stuff was happening and photography was getting really high demand, we were also the trend at that time, or the popular style of portrait photography was very like telephoto lenses were everywhere. You had that super, super creamy, dreamy backdrop where your subject and the backdrop were very separated, which is an extremely difficult thing to do with a phone camera, just optically. Like you can fake it with portrait mode, but that is not, certainly portrait mode wasn't available then, and they made it available now, and probably very few people are using it because now the style is a more like 35 millimeter look. And I mean, that extends even to like pop-up flash is back in style, and that is like hilariously antithetical to what was going on then. So in addition to all these other sort of, the wind was at our back for so many things, and part of it was that the people were like, what they saw that professionals were doing was totally different from what they could achieve on their own, even if they were given a phone from today, was delivered into the past. It just wasn't available to them. So now the tide has come out.
Yeah.
Where I'm just going to continue to mix metaphors here, where it's like the style is more in line with what phones can achieve. Phones are just straight up better. People aren't trying to make everything look all perfect all the time. And then, you have the whole fact of the matter that like there are a ton of photographers, and technology has continued to make it easier to start a business in that, like, I had to take a WordPress class to design and execute a website when I started. Now you can get a fantastic looking website. You don't need anything other than some photos to put in there.
But that's not just true for photography. That is true for small business startups across the board, right? Yep. But I do want to push back on that. So that specific there's more photographers than ever. I want to push back on that a little bit. And I actually went and did research on this to say, like, how many is there, like, is it like growing exponentially and the demand is down? And the answer is yes, the number of photographers has grown and grown. However, the demand for professional photography continues to outpace the number of photographers that there are coming in.
Yeah.
So I think this is really more of a mindset thing about, okay, so the barrier to entry is a little bit lower, which means at the lowest level of, photographers, the competition is fierce. There are a lot of brand new photographers. So the challenge then, unlike when you started, isn't can I leap over all these technical barriers to, like, can I build a website? Can I do that? Everybody can do that. So now the barrier becomes a mindset one of, like, how do I become the cream of the crop? How do I rise above? Again, let's go back to my boss analogy. How do I beat this first level of the video game and go to level 2 or level 3 or level 4 or whatever you want it to be? And so I think that, you guys can Google these stats for yourself. Like the numbers are not my forte, but like when I was looking at the number of photographers, I think it was like the number of photographers, professional photographers who like claimed that, on their taxes or whatever in 2024, I think was like 120,000 people. Like, think about that compared to the number of people that live in the US. That's like, it's like minuscule. So, and of course, maybe not everybody is claiming that or whatever, but like, again, that number is teeny tiny compared to the number of people that are having kids, that are getting married, that want professional photos of their family, that want pictures of their dogs, that like what all the options that are available out there. So I feel like this is the part where you need to look back and say to yourself, okay, what mini boss do I have to get over in 2025? And it might be a little bit different for every person. So I would encourage, if you're listening in right now, I would encourage you to really think about what was the thing that felt the most frustrating. What was your boulder? Is it Sisyphus? Who pushes the rock up the...
Yes, I think so. Sisyphian task.
Yes. Like, what is your rock that you feel like you're pushing up the hill and it keeps pushing you back down? Like, what is that for you? Is it that, you aren't getting enough inquiries? Is it that you are getting enough inquiries, but they're not converting over? Is it that you feel like you made okay money, but it was like the amount of time it took? I feel like this might be one for a lot of people. Like, let's say, look at how much money you made this year. Now, take that number, and if it was exactly the same, but you spent half the hours of the year making that amount of money, would you feel differently about how successful you are?
Right.
So it's those kind of little shifts. Like if you got the same amount of inquiries, but 75% of them booked instead of 33% of them, would you feel differently? So it's, I think, more about looking at your your little boss in a critical way and being like, that isn't a failure. I'm not going to stop trying to beat this boss, but what tools do I need to go back and gather? What skills do I need to learn? Or another one that I feel like I'm hearing for people a lot is like, my clients are so fussy, or like everybody's so picky, or like so difficult to deal with. And there's always going to be difficult clients in the world, but this is going to be a tough love from Dayna moment. If you keep having the same complaint over and over again from a bunch of clients, the common denominator in that situation has to be you a little bit. So you have to be willing to take a critical look at where your communication is failing. If the same people are having the same issue over and over again, they're like, oh, I didn't realize this was going to be this way. Or if you are having the same problem with inquiries where people are going to your website and then they're like shocked by your pricing, maybe your website isn't really doesn't match up to what your pricing is. So you need to be willing to look at that critically.
Well, and I want to sort of underline that, because I think a lot of people listening may say, well, the boss that's getting in my way right now is that nobody's willing to pay profitable rates. Now, there are external factors that no doubt, like we've just been talking about this bubble and the fact that like, whereas before we had a tailwind, now we're maybe dealing with a bit of a headwind this past year, but it's still possible to move forward. I also, as many of the people, or as many people as I've heard from this year who have had, you know, their worst year, I've also heard from several photographers who are killing it. Like they're doing great. And it seems to me like if you get to the point where you're like, I'm still in this game, you know, if you're not, if you're like, nope, I'm done fighting this fight, I'm done pushing this rock up the hill, like no shade whatsoever. That is, I mean, ultimately we'll all make that decision at some point. It's really a matter of like figuring out whether that's where you are. But if you're not, then you have to like take a break, you know, do whatever you need to do to sort of like regain your composure. Certainly we are here at the end of the busy season, and like we all tend to have at least a couple of days where we're like, I can't do this anymore.
Even you had that day.
I know. I do every year. No doubt at all. And then, but when you come back to it and you're like, I'm in, you have to be all in. Like there is no, the self pity or the like, well, it's just the industry or whatever, that doesn't serve you at all. And it pains me to see people wallowing in that, because I'm like, every bit of energy that you are putting into this pity party, and I'm going to jump on the tough love train, but every bit of energy that you're putting into that is wasted energy. Like no one cares whether, and I'm not saying I care about you and your feelings and all that sort of stuff, but like your clients do not care. And when they see and feel that energy, it repels them. So every minute that you spend doing that is actually sabotaging the potential for moving past it or getting past that level.
Yeah. And so for me, I have always been an entrepreneur. I have always been the kind of person who likes to figure out a business, and it really is a game for me. And so I would encourage you to try to gamify your business a little bit. Like it's not like a cute little turn of phrase. When you really do think about it, like a board game, a video game, a whatever, and you're like, okay, what are the next moves that I need to make in order to like win at this? It becomes a little less personal and a lot more like a logic puzzle that you can figure out. And so to your point about like people aren't willing to pay those rates, first of all, that is just not true. That is like law of attraction working in reverse. So like this idea of like, if you're going to buy a white Hyundai, then all of a sudden, all you see on the road are white Hyundais. And you're like, everyone has a white Hyundai. I can't buy that. Right. Okay. So it's the same idea. If you're like, nobody's willing to buy my rate or pay my rates, that's all you're going to see out in the world is other photographers who are like, no one is willing to pay my rates. But if you are like, nope, there are people out there who are willing to pay for good photography, then that is what you will start to attract back to yourself. And, you know, you talk about this all the time, not every profitable rate is the same for every photographer. So this sort of goes back to my idea of like, you need to figure out what profitability means and looks like for you. Maybe this other photographer spends 15 hours per client, and so their rates are higher accordingly. But if you spend 3 hours per client and are charging, you know, half of what they charge, you're actually still more profitable than they are. So it's not just about who can charge the most. It's actually, this is where the game part comes in. It's actually about how can you figure out how to streamline your workload and your systems and your whole like process so that you can charge a rate that people are willing to pay, but that you are the most profitable you can be. That is how you gamify it. Ooh, I just got goosebumps. It's like, that is how you gamify your business and win. Like, and that's when you're going to start feeling really good because you're like, great. I am like doing what I love. I am providing an amazing service. I am charging a fee that is fair and that people are willing to pay, and I'm making great money. That is a win all the way around.
Right. And I will play devil's advocate on that a little bit and say that there are people, and they're not the two of us, but there are plenty of people in this industry for whom like hyper efficiency and the most money per hour is not the number one goal. And I think that they get hung up on this, like, well, but that's not what I'm really trying to do here. I want my clients to have an amazing experience. I want to, you know, like really take the time to, you know, spend on my craft. which I appreciate and I totally support. And this is part of the whole like run a profitable, sustainable business that you love. The problem is when you put all that heart and time and energy into something and you don't succeed, it's way harder to be like, well, that didn't work. Let's try something else.
Yeah.
And so I do think that there is a balance to be struck, no matter where you fall on the
Yes.
spectrum of people who are like business minded versus like 100% I'm here for the art. Wherever you are on that spectrum, it is important to set yourself up sustainably and to set yourself up profitably, because let's say that like things are not great in the industry this particular year and it's halfway through the year and you are not on track to hit your financial goal for the year. But because you've set your business up in such a way where if you're not working, you actually have time, you're not just constantly like turning that wheel, then you could go out and, get put your editing services on Upwork and go get some jobs doing other freelance work while you're waiting for things to kind of turn around, or while you're trying something new in your business, or while you're implementing a new process. All of those things, the sustainability piece allows you to kind of grow and shrink
and pivot.
The amount of effort that you're putting in without having to throw the whole thing out just because it's been a tough season.
Yes, that is really exactly the point. And I want you to I want to say that again so that people really hear that, because it's like, if you already have your business set up sustainably, you can grow the amount of time you put into it or shrink the amount of time that you put into it, but your profit margins will be the same percent no matter what. And so then if you need to shrink like the time that you're putting into your business, God forbid, let's say something, terrible happens, a health crisis, or like you need to just take some time away, you are still able to be profitable in 20% of the time that you were, putting into it. Or, when which I am sure will happen, when the tailwind comes again, and then you're able to like open your sales, you're at 100% and you are not missing out. You're 100% profitable. So that you are already set up for success no matter what.
Yeah. And that has kept my business afloat for all these years. It really has been, at least in the last half, since I didn't have, my ex-husband's income for the last 7 years, that was not a factor. And all of a sudden it was like, I gotta be responsible for all this stuff. The fact that happened, and that I then was like, okay, I got to get really serious about the sustainability piece of things. It's the only reason that I've been able to stay in business and continue to make money as a photographer. I feel like that, plus having this growth mindset where I was like, well, all this crappy stuff is going on and I can be upset about it and like whatever, and I can shut down. And that was, again, not only a reasonable option, but one that I was strongly considering, that because I was like, I'm going to continue to let's try something different, and it might fail, but if it doesn't fail, I get to continue doing this thing that I love.
Yeah.
And that's, I guess at the end of the episode, at the end of the day, that's really the message that I want to put out there for everyone listening, is that like, it is hard. Business is hard a lot of the time. And it's particularly, I think, difficult because when you're your own boss and you're working for a company of one, you're having these conversations in your head.
Yeah.
And it tends to be that like the gremlins come out, and they're based in fear of failure, fear of, am I wasting time? Is everyone laughing at me? Whatever your particular flavor of fear is. And you can really talk yourself into a situation where you're like, never mind, I'm just going to walk away. And again, there's nothing wrong with walking away, but if you do it because of something like fear, then that really is sad to me. The reason that I'm here doing like the education side of my business is that I want more photographers to run these sustainable businesses, these profitable businesses, because I think that this is such a beautiful addition to the world. I think that, being able to show people their everyday through, your vision, I think it enriches people's lives. And it certainly, as an artist, has enriched my own life. So I just would love to caution everyone out there to take it slow. Take the, try and, do your frustrated dance, and then unless you're walking away, get back on the horse and
figure out, okay, so recap, figure out what's your little mini boss for 2025. Take a step back, look at your business. What tool do you need to go back? What spell do you need to go learn? What is it that you need to figure out to get to beat the mini boss of 2025? And then also, I would say, like Anami's saying, define or remember what success looks like for you. I think there is a lot of noise out there about you're only successful in photography if you make X amount of money. And that is just not true in photography or any business. There are plenty of reasons for you to start any kind of business out there, but certainly a photography business that are not purely financial. So if you are, hitting your income goal and still able to, stay home with your kids, or do work another full-time job that you also really love, or, if this, again, not everybody's end is the same end.
Right.
So I think that's what I would say to people right now is as we are coming into this new year, gamify your business a little bit, take a critical look at it, and then just remember what success looks like for you. Make sure that your ladder is leaning up against the right building.
I want to go back and count all of the different metaphors and similes that we used in this episode.
We're insane. I know. We're just metaphor queens. We can't help it.
It's just how we talk. I should put in the intro something about this should be a drinking game. It is, we've outdone ourselves, but I also really enjoyed this conversation and hope that everybody listening did too, because I think it's an important one, and I appreciate you being here to talk with me about it.
Yeah, and thanks for having me on. And if you guys, we're here on social media, we're in Facebook, we're on Instagram. I know it can feel a little scary to leave a comment or send a DM, but that's what we're here for. So reach out if you need support.
And if you need more Dayna in your life, make sure you join the Consistency Club.
That's where I am.
Oh my goodness. All right. Well, thank you so much. I will talk to you soon.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Well, that's it for this week's episode of This Can't Be That Hard. I'll be back same time, same place next week. In the meantime, you can find more information about this episode, along with all the relevant links, notes, and downloads at thiscan'tbethathard.com/learn. If you like the podcast, be sure to hit the subscribe button. Even better, share the love by leaving a review in iTunes. And as always, thanks so much for joining me. I hope you have a fantastic week.